Then Isaac Newton, the third law of motion: for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The basic idea here, applied to morality, is that when you commit an act that is immoral or evil, it is not just the victim that suffers consequences, it is the perpetrator as well. That's kind of the main thesis of this talk. Anyone know They Might Be Giants, the band?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, they had a song in 1990, Your Racist Friend, and there's a line in it: you can't shake hands with the devil and say, I'm only kidding. And it's kind of a more succinct, clever way of paraphrasing these quotes. There are consequences to immorality and to evil actions. So next slide, please. So again, that's the basic thesis here, is that when we're talking about racism, of course, there are victims, and it is reasonable and right to focus on the victims and their suffering. But I think it's also useful to focus on the perpetrators, not just in terms of understanding the psychology of evil, but also the implications of evil actions for the perpetrators. So again, if you think of racism as a kind of monster, the perpetrators then are the monsters. And one of the sort of general characteristics of any monster is there is some either spiritual lacking or a soullessness. And so committing an act of racism should create some sort of spiritual illness or a soul sickness. So certainly you can look throughout imagination and myth and fiction and find many examples of monsters that are very disturbing, frightening, and in some cases they represent some force that exists within society, some individual who is evil, who has been sort of caricatured as a monster. But you don't need to look to fiction or imagination or myth. You can find monsters just living amongst us throughout humanity. So what I have, and you can put up the next picture, is a series of, or the next slide, a series of pictures. There's a fictional monster, and then what I would call a real monster engaged in some sort of race-related action or expression. So on your right over here, we have sort of a classic ghoul. One of the things to notice about this individual, who looks like they've probably been feasting on brains, I would say.
For sure.
The eyes are white. So usually when we try to identify the seat of humanity within a fellow human, we look to the eyes and the pupils, and we'll appeal to the eyes of another person for mercy or for compassion. And part of the point of the depiction of pupils is there's no way to appeal to humanity. It's just a blank slate. This individual on your left, what's left out of the picture, he's at a lynching and there's a body hanging from a tree, and he's pointing to the body. And although this individual has irises and pupils, I would suggest if you're looking for humanity in those eyes at this moment, you're not going to find it. Which of these monsters is more disturbing? To me, it's very clear the one on the left is far more disturbing, but also entirely real. Next slide, please. Here on your left, you have the sisters from The Shining, the Stanley Kubrick film. And this is a common sort of trope in stories and movies. You have the corrupted innocence of youth, Children of the Corn, The Ring, The Exorcist. There's 1,000 movies that have malevolent children in them. And again, it's especially disturbing because we think of children as innocent and angelic. Over here on the right, it's another lynching. In this case, you actually see part of the body here, but you have a child who looks so angelic, who's smiling. And if you took them out of the picture, you might imagine they were at a fair. It was, I don't know, a Easter or something like that. But no, she's at a lynching and just beaming with pride. Again, where's the real monster here? Which one is more disturbing? I think, again, clearly the real monster on the right. Next slide, please. Here on your right, you have sort of maybe a post-apocalyptic military-style ghoul. And on the left, you have an individual from some sort of white pride, alt-right, whatever it is, movement in their little uniform get-up thing. And but once again, if you look in the eyes of the monster on your right, it's just white. There is a lack of humanity here, a lack of compassion, empathy, and so on. Once again, this individual has eyes and pupils, but you would struggle to find humanity in this moment. This person has come under the spell of an ideology, and that ideology has transformed them into a monster in this moment. Next slide. Here on your right, you have zombies, which George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, I think was 1968 was when that movie came out. And zombies crave brains. So maybe that's sort of metaphorically saying they're trying to eat your humanity. And here on your left, you have the 1960 lunch counter protests in Greensboro, North Carolina, where you have some protesters just sitting at a lunch counter and a crowd of individuals behind them pouring drinks and food items on the heads of these people, shouting horrible things and death threats. Again, trying to steal the humanity of these individuals. I would even theorize that maybe the reason that Night of the Living Dead came out in the late 60s was this was the monster for the times. The monster is not a Dracula or a werewolf. It's society. We are the monsters, and we are under the spell of this racist ideology. Again, it's more palatable, I think, to think about zombies who just want our brains. Another point you can make is that the zombies are not winning. They're living a life in hell, or an unlife in hell. And it's not clear that these people in the background here at the lunch counters are winning anything. They're sort of trading in their souls for this moment of power over these individuals sitting in this protest. Next slide, please. Here on your left, you have your sort of run-of-the-mill bloody ghoul, graphic ghoul. And then on the right, this is an image that may be familiar from a couple years ago, one of these alt-right Proud Boys, whatever it was, protest, the Tiki Torch protest. And this particular individual kind of became iconic and represented all of the other people. But it's this just a person who has been taken by rage, again, based on an ideology. And as disturbing as this image on the left is, the one on the right is just exponentially more disturbing to me because that's a real person who represents a population of individuals who share this very fearful, ignorant, hateful ideology. Next. Here on the left, you have just your classic ghost, a hood. On the right, you have KKK members in their little uniforms. And I mean, here, the analogy just couldn't be more clear. We're literally just dressing up like monsters and doing monstrous things. And obviously, part of the purpose of those uniforms is to spread fear and intimidation. Okay, so next slide. So I think it's not rocket science to suggest that monsters are characters of humans and human characteristics, the sort of, I guess, darker side of humanity, some of the things that you see on the list there, and racism, xenophobia certainly would be included on that list. And I think part of the appeal of monster movies and stories is that they allow us to confront some of these human characteristics in a way that is sort of safe because it's an unreality. We know that vampires aren't real. We know that zombies aren't real. We know that werewolves aren't real. On the other hand, we know the Holocaust happened. That actually happened. Racism was a 400-year ongoing crime that's still happening. It's hard to confront those realities. It's much easier to confront zombies and ghouls and ghosts. And then I think I have one more slide. So here's a quote from Thomas Aquinas to end this up. Sin is a spiritual illness, thus sinners are in need of salvation. So again, typically when we think about racism, we think about the victims, and we think about reparations, and healing the victims, and making them whole again, and restoring their dignity and their humanity, and that's as it should be. But I think that we cannot truly move past racism unless we also consider the harms that the ideology of racism has conferred upon the perpetrators as well. It's as if an exorcism is needed to exorcise the demons that have infested individuals who have perpetrated racist acts for hundreds of years. And that's not the most satisfying conclusion, that we need to really have a little compassion for the racists and the people who have committed lynchings and hate crimes and heal them as well. But they are us. I mean, they are humans and they have been taken under this spell. And I think that before we can truly move on, which may not happen for 100 years, we will need to exorcise those individuals who have been taken under this spell and infested with these demons, so to speak. So that's it. Thanks.
All right. Next up, we have Mr. Brand. artist and an empowering voice behind youth, or young disenfranchised youth. He's also a behavioral health specialist at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center of Psychiatry. And he's making his way. Thank you for coming.
All righty then. How's everybody doing? Awesome sauce. So, it's good to be here, first of all. Thank you, B. Jizzle and American Field. You know what I'm saying? Grand Pride. Y'all know about that. Hold it down, baby. So when I thought about monsters from my perspective, indicative to that of my profession. So I went to work, and we had these group monster sessions with the population that I serve. Because I felt like they deserved a voice. So I made a choice. See, I work in adolescent psychiatry, and oftentimes I use methods of dialectical behavior therapy to reach what at times seems completely unreachable, and to teach what can often be considered unteachable circumstances. I mean, the chances of high acuity, bad behavior, ambivalence, psychosis, suicidal, and homicidal ideations. Maladaptive thinking, consistent recidivism. Listen, the kids decided to see that I would convey what they thought to you all poetically. Keep up. Like the softest of knock or the softest of walk on a hardwood floor, and a most frightening gentle knock on a little girl's door at 3 hours past midnight. Or yet another fight, and his household remains firmly divided. And yes, you provided life, and for that you should be grateful, but that gives them no cause to beat you. Or that you have to raise your siblings, because oftentimes you're the only ones there. And I dare you go to that school and say something about what happens in this house to a teacher. And that preacher, he better mind his business too. See, in the movies, the heroine slew the monster, and all was well. Another tale, heroine created a monster, as evidenced by disfigurement, fits of rage and anger, complete lack of empathy and blood-sucking tendencies, or that a coward would have the audacity his hands on a woman because he thinks he can, while the children stand there helpless, bearing witness to such atrocities. You know, one kid in group specifically was asked about monsters, and the only answer he could give was, "Mr. B, I'm not afraid of any fake monsters in movies, because there are real monsters where I live." All right, that's the poem section for y'all. Hope y'all, I let your boy is. So, I'm old, right? So I don't do slides because I believe, devil make the computer. That's why I'm slow. So, so I do a lot of poetic deliverances, and that was something that me and my kids created. So I went to work. I I said, all right. I said, look, I gotta go speak at the symposium. I'm going back to the field. Mansfield, Mississippi, where's that at? It's close to where LeBron James from. Don't worry about it. It's close to where King James from. So I need y'all to help me deliver this talk as far as what we're going to talk about. And I said, okay, so monsters, go. I don't know, you take too long, shut up. Monsters, go. And because of where I work at, because I'm in adolescent psychiatry, and the things that I see on a consistent basis are made-for-TV movies. And I've seen some things that all you can do is go home and pray and hope that it doesn't happen to your children or your significant other. And it gets very, very deep and it gets very, very real. You have to be very mindful that you are professional and not too connected. Because when somebody comes in that reminds you of your story, then look out, because it'll get heavier. So we in group, Mr. B, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, kids, y'all supposed to shut up when I'm talking. I love talking to my kids crazy. And Mr. B, you so crazy. That's what I love you, Mr. B. So we did a series of drawings, and I thought it was interesting because this is what I'll do. I'll give my kids a topic, and I'll say, like, especially when we do poetry, and when we do spoken word sessions, those are like my deepest groups. That's why I came out with the poem at first. And it was a poem from the beginning. Did you catch that, preacher? Of course you did. So, and it'll be my deepest group because I'll say, okay, the word is water. And I know I'm picking on preacher because I can. Because he's gonna forgive me. That's what I know. He's the only one I know for sure in this house that's gonna forgive me. So I'm gonna mess with him for the rest of the night. So, if you don't, then I'm gonna have to show up this church and talk about him. Oh, you don't forgive everybody. So I give him a topic, water. And I say everybody right. And it's intriguing to see the different cultural aspects, the different gender aspects. You take the word water, and it will go so deep and so heavy with these kids who are what we do, crisis stabilization. So, parents come in, and sometimes you see why the kids are there. So, and they're like, well, you ain't fix them. I said, well ma'am, I'm sorry. We can't fix them. All we can do is stabilize the crisis and give them some coping skills they can hopefully they can utilize. That's when all the work starts. But, we can help. But you give them that word, and they go with it. And it's amazing we do these groups. And I've seen more drainage of emotions in these groups than anything else because you allow a child to expose themselves. And when you are self-reflective on why you're there, when you are all the way admitting, okay, I'm here because of this, and then you can share it. There is a power that comes in exposing what you know to be wrong with you. And when you put that to the atmosphere, that's I'm an old school Christian dude, so I think forgiveness is the best medicine. Let's look it out the way. But I feel like when you expose things that are hindering you, and you put them out there, that's healing also. So my kids came up with some different monsters. So we got some Pennywise up in here. So and this is all the same group, right? So we got Pennywise coming through. I got them laminated because I figured y'all might want to. I'm all about, I'm a big hugger. COVID about killed me because I'm a big come here, give me some sugar. I'm that dude. I'm hugging. I'm like, oh, come on, baby girl. So I got this half skull, half face. And I always have stories behind them, right? Every time I do a group with a kid, I had this girl that says, I think monsters are misunderstood. And I'm like, that's fantastic. Put some more color on that for me, baby. That was good. This was pretty deep, right? So I had a child that was praying, and then you had some things happening here with some suicide stuff. And, so where I work at, oftentimes somebody working with like, oh, don't draw that stuff. And I'm like, and I'm an artist, so I'm really, I'm sensitive about art. I'm like, why can't they draw it? Because if this is how they feel and they're expressing themselves, maybe you should listen to what they're conveying to you artistically instead of telling them that's not appropriate. Because maybe they need to have a conversation. So I'm gonna get all in my feelings in a second. So, what else we got? Oh, this girl had one. She said, but Mr. B, all I can draw is stick figures. The baby draw, and that's what she do. She just stick figures. And she wrote a poem, and it's My Dad's a Monster. Right? You gaslight me for fun. It seems like you're always on the run. You never act like you care, and I'm done because it isn't fair. And I get this consistently when we do certain things. I love this one. So this one was a child who felt like they were being left alone. I was like, wow, look at that. And it's like, you can feel that. You can feel, and I like this kid because this kid has, again, Marci's coming at, he has what's called as confident mark making. Like they can just go. They don't do like, they just kind of go and they flow and they're very confident, which means they're artistic, which means they're confident what they're doing. So that can translate to other things if you can do that. Some kids can, some kids can't. There's one kid had this is my homeboy too. He had some guns in the skull, and I was like, all right, bro, But that's his thing, that's his MO, that's what he does. But then you have to talk about, okay, so where is this kid from? What neighborhood did he come from, right? Why do some kids gravitate to certain things? Why are some kids more violent? I deal with kids all the time in the inner city, and I'll be out there, and I paint murals a lot. And one of my biggest problems where I paint murals at in Cincinnati is they have this big agenda of making certain neighborhoods beautiful, and they love to go out and put paint on walls, and then they leave. So you make these connections. You do this stuff, and you engage this community, and after the paint is dry, everybody's gone. And I have a problem with that. So I try to, make a presence known, start an initiative, start some classes, do something that lets them know. Because I've been mentoring now for 20-something years, and one of the most important things you can do in a child's life is be present, is be available. And when you show up and then you leave, you just like everybody else. And now they're back to not trusting anybody. This one was probably the deepest one that a kid drew. And it showed a black eye on a female. I'm like, wow, that's deep. They're always watching what we do. They're always observing. And we have to be very mindful. I was at work last week, and we were having this session actually. Coworker had some bad news, and they started crying on the menu. I told her, I said, hey, do me a favor. Tell her to excuse herself immediately. Because where we work at is not the time for that. You have to be like, those kids cannot tell nothing was happening with you in your life personally. Because when it's time to work on my milieu and in my hospital and psychiatry, you gotta be like MJ in just about every game he ever played. You can't be like, not wanting to go to practice. I said, love you to Al Iverson, it's all good. You have to be ready, you have to be prepared. Because I often tell people, well, when did you start your shift? What do you mean when I started my shift? I started my shift. I said, see, that's a problem. Because in this field, you better start your shift in your car ride to work and whatever you need to listen to. Because we about to start dealing with these kids' monsters. And their monsters is deep, and it's heavy, and it's weighted. And we have to be prepared as clinicians to be able to say, okay, whatever monsters you got, I'm here to help you slay them. All right, that's my time.
All right. So last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Pastor Aaron Williams, served as pastor of the Maddox Memorial Church of God in Christ in Mansfield, Ohio for the past 5 years. He has formerly served in ministry for 18 years. He also works for the Mansfield School District and serves as a mentor for youth in the community. So, Pastor, would you like to come on up? And all I can say is, it might be your turn now. I don't know.
I got big shoulders.
Wow. This has been amazing this evening. I want to give a shout out to Ryan Gladden for this opportunity. Absolutely. Brave gentleman, because this is a serious topic, and as I was going through and wondering what are we going to talk about this evening, myself. Certainly all of, not all, but some of the topics that were touched on this evening have crossed my mind. Racism, first of all. But certainly when Brian asked me about this and talked to me about it and tried to share his vision as far as what the monsters we deal with, something he said to me was either real or perceived monsters. And certainly the monsters that have been presented this evening have been real in a lot of people's minds and their hearts, real in our faces. Some we have seen on social media, on the media, in the media. And some people deal with their monsters individually. Many other folks may not ever see or witness the monsters that some people are dealing with. And I think Mr. Billingsley spoke about that rather eloquently. And so I would like to share with you a monster that hopefully kind of sums up everything. And trust me, please know, I had no idea I was going to be last tonight.
Will you forgive us?
And I'm daunted by all of these learned individuals who have come ahead of me. I'm honored. I'm grateful. Dr. Joyce spoke on the Odyssey, dealing with those several monsters. I didn't really realize that they were broken up into male and female. How they all had their different, and I knew they were male and female, but I didn't realize just how they were broken up like that. And you brought that to light, and how they all had their own way of tormenting an individual. Dr. Joyce, Dr. Kitchen talked about evolution of aggression, which is a monster, can be a monster if unchecked. She spoke about us having big brains. We should be able to handle our aggression. I work in the school systems, as mentioned, and a lot of the kids say, I have anger issues. I got anger issues too. You do? You do? Yes, but I have to keep my anger in check.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, some things might happen that I will feel bad about later on.
Come on.
Okay? So, we have to keep our anger in check. And then Dr. Mazzocco spoke about the monster of racism. A racist being a monster. That can be a daunting thing for different segments of people. Scary thing. Mr. Billingsley came with the poetic domestic violence. Never heard domestic violence that poetic. Although entertaining, it is very frightening. Very frightening. But I would like to submit to you today the monster of ignorance, if I may. Monster of ignorance. First of all, let me share with you the definition of monster that I have. Grotesquely deviates from normal shape, behavior, or character. Excites, or incites, I should say, horror by wickedness and cruelty. Ignorance, let's look at ignorance. Simply the state of not knowing, for the purpose of what we're speaking about this evening. Simply the state of not knowing. The lack of knowledge or information. State of not knowing. You don't know. I was ignorant to that fact. I was ignorant to the purposes of the different monsters in the what was your the Odyssey. What was I going to say? The Iliad or Iliad? The Iliad. Yeah, the Odyssey. Okay, so ignorance. I want to submit to you that ignorance actually breeds fear. Ignorance breeds fear, and I'm going to get to you what we tend to fear what we do not understand, what we don't know about. If we don't understand it, or if it's different to us, we tend to draw back from it. I think it takes a lot of courage for someone to go into a foreign country, into their jungle, and look and study a creature that kind of looks like us, but doesn't speak our language. They're a little more hairy than we are. And then at times they go out and hunt other ones that look like them and kill them with their bare hands. It takes courage. Because personally, I don't know anything about it. I'm ignorant to it. And so I'm afraid of that. I'm not going looking out for no chimpanzees. And a few years ago, I heard in the news where this lady had a pet chimpanzee and it ate her face. You know, I'll get a goldfish. All right? So ignorance, you know, let's look at it. It breeds fear. Ignorance can breed fear. Even, let's go to church for a moment. The Apostle Paul, in his letters to the churches in Rome, Corinth, and Thessalonica, he often exclaimed about 5 or 6 times in these letters, some of these letters, that he would not have the people who are reading the letter to be ignorant. He said, I would not have you to be ignorant, brother, concerning this, that, or another thing, whatever he was addressing. I do not want you not to know or not to understand where I'm coming from with something. Because this situation, whatever it was he was talking about, was so important, I do not want you to be afraid for lack of knowledge. I do not want you to fall prey to the device for lack of knowledge of what you're up against, right? So, what kinds of things do we lack knowledge about? What are we afraid of? The dark. The dark. Simple, right? And you may say, well, I'm grown up now. I'm an adult. I have nothing to fear in the dark. Well, just stub your toe in the dark. Stub that little toe in the dark. I guarantee you'll go and find you some light tomorrow. Because you don't want that to happen again. I often say in my dissertations, if you will, my messages, that we are all one body. We're all important. The church, the body of Christ, we as humans, we are all connected. We are all important. And I said, if you don't believe me, stub your little toe. Everything about you will stop to see about that little toe. All right? Both of your hands will go to grabbing it. Everything stops. And so we are all connected. An unfamiliar place. We got lost. I was with my mother and father. I was maybe 12, 13, so several years ago. We were on our way to Chicago to visit some family for the first time. Never been to Chicago, and I believe Cabrini Greens was still up at the time. And so my mother and father, they got turned around, and we got there late at night. And so, and it was hot. It was hot outside. So that's an X factor, the heat, right?
Yeah.
And so we get to an area. I remember vividly because people started talking it out. Hey, what are you doing with that nice car? Hey, what you doing around here? You don't belong around. Started throwing rocks at us, right? We got scared. We didn't know where we were. We didn't know which way to turn to get out of there. Fear came upon us because we did not know where we were. An unfamiliar place. Snakes. Creatures that we don't understand necessarily. Those things, when we see them, maybe we see them on TV, oh, that's cool, that's neat, that's nifty. You see one in your house, though. Or a mouse. Even a mouse. They're maybe relatively harmless creatures. But how many 300-pound fellas will jump up on a chair? I'm not 300 pounds, but I'll jump. Close, right? We get scared of things that we do not understand. People who do not look like us, speak like us, or worship like us, live like us, eat the same foods we do, or as we're eating, do the same things. There are cultures that don't use utensils. They just use their fingers. Yeah. Cultures that don't sit in a chair. They sit on the floor. Cultures that wear different types of clothing. And because we don't understand it, we may fear it. And our fear can turn into aggression. Ignorance. I'm almost finished. Zoot Suit riots, June 3rd through the 8th, 1943, Los Angeles, California, where Mexican Americans were targeted and beaten. Some of them were slain, I believe. Emmett Till, Rosewood, Florida. Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. I believe they say that is the first time that bombs fell from planes to American soil. And it was done in aggression to an African American community. A well-to-do community in 1921. It was called Black Wall Street. African Americans own their own businesses, their own banks, their own homes. Very affluent. But some people, I guess, for whatever the spark was that started that aggression for 2 to 3 days, someone didn't like or didn't understand what they saw. Chinese Massacre of 1871, where Chinese were systematically lynched in Los Angeles, California. The Executive Order 9066 came forth in 1942 and went on through 1945, where Japanese Americans were rounded up and placed in internment camps after we were bombed at Pearl Harbor. An executive order came down from a beloved president, but for ignorance, not knowing, simply not knowing. This is not, I'm not coming at people hard and saying that they're stupid or they're mean or I'm saying they simply do not know. Simply do not know. Viola Liuzzo, 39-year-old woman from Detroit, Michigan, mother of 5, happened to be a white lady, shot to death in Selma, Alabama, for trying to help African Americans to register to vote. And when I look at this, and Dr. Mazzocco talked about racism, and yes, there were the images that we saw when we think of racism tend to be white on black, if you will, but there are many episodes. There are some black on white racisms because we don't understand. I submit to you that these things and other instances happened to different people at different points in time because we as a whole find it hard to understand one another. And we are ignorant to one another. I also submit to you that I think it would take the courage of a physician, of a doctor who goes to a foreign country, into the jungle, to learn about a creature that they maybe previously don't know about. It would take some courage like that for even us to learn about one another. And when we can learn about one another, when we can understand one another, we can dispel fear. Thank you.
That's what you're about.
All right, thank you so much. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion of things. Andrea Whitmer is going to come up and lead us in that. Panelists, I think we're going to have you sit in the fabulous. I'm going to be right behind you.
Oh, this I am not ignorant.
Yeah.
Yeah, break.
Yeah, a couple minute break.
Okay.
This I am not ignorant. Oh. This way you think so.
Pete. We can take a quick intermission. So we can do this for 15 minutes and then afterwards we can retire to the Phoenix, or we can go as long as you guys want.
So this is everything is up for grabs. So you'll see me, and you'll see the children.
Senora.
Activities, introduce art as a coping skill. Set them off now, like I said, let's do this. And if you keep them busy, keep them and it's wonderful. I believe successful. So, yeah, I'm on my
That's why we're so glad that I waited so long to get that. I could have written it 20 years ago, but it just would have been, here's what happened.
I can take down.
And it's like, no.
For something that you threw together, it did not do.
So glad you did that. There was some little innuendo. There was some Love Jones moments in there that kind of almost snapped.
So what?
I'm not exactly What do you think? It's rolling pretty good. I think.
That's what I'm saying. Stephen, you go there. Stephen, go there and here.
Nice job.
You're coming with me. I'm telling you about but you know, there's this whole controversy about nature nurture. Like, what is nature nurture? Of course, you know,
We have a question. We have a question. We can start without them. Go.
Snakes, right?
Yes. In the light.
Unless something bad happens, like other people.
All right. So, let's continue, guys.
All right, so I will have a lot of questions because I'm a librarian and that's what we do. We help people ask questions. We help people who don't know what questions they want to ask come up with questions. So I do this all day long, and that's just basically me warning you that if you don't have questions to ask, and I put students on the spot like this all the time, one time only I will actually rescue you and ask a question for you. First, I'm going to see if anyone in the audience has any questions they would like to ask first. Yes.
I'm going to refer kind of to the Nazis that are almost all dead now, the original Nazis. You
I
rarely
feel like you're asking me about, I feel like you're talking to me about Nazis and I'm a little nervous.
No, anybody.
Okay, anyone. Oh, good. Because, you know, I don't know any Nazis. I mean, as far as I know.
This goes to willful ignorance, and as an example, the Nazis. You still see these 99-year-old Nazis that are still alive, and you rarely hear one say, I've spent a lifetime thinking about what I was involved with and I was wrong. They seem to be all going to their death in old age, unrepentant for what they were involved in. And to me, one of my questions then is, although with a desire to learn about your brother, you can understand them, what do you do with the ones that don't want to understand?
Well, sir, if you're asking me as the pastor, the preacher, the fella who, as my brother said, should forgive, that's what I do. And that didn't come overnight. That's not something that, for me, was an automatic thing to forgive those who mistreat me. I had to really think, even over the last few years, because it seemed that racists seemed to be a little more emboldened. It was no more undercover as it once was. I went to, I was born in New Jersey, and the school I went to was multicultural. I had Irish, Italian, Puerto Rican, Haitians, other blacks, white people, whatever. Everybody was in my class. And then I moved here as a child, 10 years old, and I was in a predominantly white school. There was one other African American in my class from 5th grade all the way to 12th grade. We graduated together. That was it. And so I had to, over the last few years, I did a lot of inventory as to how I was really treated or thought about or felt about while I was even in school and subsequent relationships afterward. And then I had to come to a point that if I'm going to live my life, I don't need to be bitter about how people feel or treat me due to their lack of knowledge about me. Now, I'm a little, I think, to know me is to love me. I don't like to think that most people feel that way about themselves. It's not the easiest thing. You can ask my wife, but she loves me. 25 years now. But to know someone should be to love them for who they are, not who they are not to you, but for who they are. And so for me, forgiveness is a very big thing. And to do the best you can at caring for people right where they are. Real quick, I spoke with this panel, a couple of these folks here before we got here, and I brought up a gentleman, and I can't remember his name. Kamal, okay. He had went to, he was a black man who went into some KKK rallies, and he literally proselyted. I think he has over 200 people who were formerly in the KKK who had renounced that. I mean, not just members, but like Grand Dragons or whatever they call them, you know, the leadership, simply because of how he treated them, you know, how he entreated them, brought them to his home, met his family. You know, when you give somebody your trust, that says a lot. It says a lot. And they'll either misuse it or they'll cherish it. They'll honor it.
I'm not 100% sure that's somebody who captioned it on TV, so he went and did a similar thing and met people, but I don't know if he's the guy who did that, changed a bunch of people. I think he read about it and then did it on TV, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, to address that question, I home field in psychology, social psychology, so we talk about social influence. We studied belief and opinion change, and there are some beliefs and opinions that are held emotionally, and you can't attack those with rational arguments. The word ignorance implies a willful turning away from the truth. Like if I'm ignoring you, I'm choosing not to pay attention to you. And it's very easy to ignore facts and arguments. But if you befriend someone from a group you supposedly hate, you can't ignore your friend. You can't ignore that I have positive emotional reactions to this individual who is a member of a group that I have been taught to abhor. And so that's one of the ways you can get to these emotionally held beliefs and opinions is attack them using relationships. It takes a very brave individual to walk into, a black person to walk into a KKK rally and say, who wants to be my friend? But that's so powerful. I mean, it's the kind of thing Jesus would do. And yeah, you could be crucified, but that's how you change these people who seem too far gone for arguments. There is
It's
hope
very
there.
dangerous, so we don't promote it.
I don't
OSU does not promote you doing that. Do not try this at home, Master.
Thank you.
So that actually makes me think of something that I come up against a lot in my daily life working with students at the university level. A lot of people will ask me at different times, well, why do we need librarians at this point? Like, people don't really even read books anymore, right? And they'll say, plus everything is online. So what's the point of a library or librarianship? And what I've realized, and this is kind of a seg into what some of the other people have mentioned tonight, is that you can be faced with all of the knowledge in the world that exists, and it can be online, right? But if you, first of all, if you are not bothered by your state of ignorance that you find yourself in, if you're not bothered by what you don't know, you're not motivated to change that. And that has to be, I think maybe that's the missing piece if we're talking about somebody who's maybe not repenting for something that they've done or some kind of greater wrong. Well, if they don't feel that they've done anything wrong, then there's nothing for them to apologize for. So I would say that, if anything, being able to move out of a state of ignorance now is definitely more of a choice than it's ever been. Because in the past you could say, well, we just didn't know. But we do know now. And so hopefully, I think what everyone is trying to convey here tonight, even though their topics are very different, is that we are all looking at the same thing, really, from different angles, and we're all trying to push forward just a little bit. So with that said, talking about sort of collective experiences and those things. Phil, I have a question for you. Do you think, and you were talking about some of the monsters that we try to kill. So let's talk about the idea of cancel culture. Do you think this is our collective attempt to kill some of these monsters that we've created?
That's a good one.
I'm glad she asked.
I'm glad you got that question.
Yeah.
She is a smart cookie.
Feel free to volley it to anyone else, but I just was thinking about it.
When I think of cancel culture, I think of zombies. I think of people who have mindlessly chosen the target, and it's a fly that they want to step upon and then not have to deal with it any longer. There's no room for context, for nuance, or redemption. It's just here's the enemy, attack, destroy, and then move on, identify another enemy. So I think it's very synonymous with taking an individual or an action and saying that was an entirely abhorrent, evil, unforgivable transgression, and therefore you will be executed, if not biologically, culturally, socially, and there will be no room for apologies or repentance. So I think it's very similar to the archetypes of the villagers marching on Frankenstein's monster, or driving a stake into the heart of a vampire. Just kill it, make it go away. No questions.
But it feels right? Like, I didn't know about this thing about the Star Spangled Banner. I just gotta tell you, tonight I found out that Star Spangled Banner
Princess Scott.
I didn't know. As a slave owner, the song wasn't so great. To me, it fills me with this like American pride for what I think America should be anyway. And I get all excited and I put my hand on my heart, even though all my friends don't, and I do. And I didn't know all this, and now the thing makes me as artistic. Do I cancel that? That's the thing. Is it a monster for me to slay, or is it a thing that I feel? I don't know.
Well, if I could, Dr. Mazzocco, and we were discussing Django Unchained, and also Two Souls Love. So, two movies that are Sidney Poitier's Two Souls Love and Django Unchained, which I have not seen, but there are racist moments or the word Negro in the play and the film, and I'm considering doing the play. But can I do that? Because of those words, I hold the word as sacred. So to go through with a pen and cut words out of something and then present it is not the same as what was written. It was written in the 60s, or before, and the message behind it, because of a few words, is what I'm struggling with. So if you guys want to address that, because Two Sons of Love is just a beautiful movie. Sidney Poitier and was it Lulu and the song, and so I think I come at it as we do a talk before and a talk after, and we leave it as it is as historic text.
Brian, you might want to talk to our host about that, because he had that word in the play we did together, and he said it was the character that was saying it, and he was a horrible person, and he kept it in. And I was of the opinion that he was not wrong to do so. It was controversial. Talk to Don.
I'm good with
It was
controversy.
ragtime. It was written way after the 60s.
I think I'm okay with controversy. I did this, right? But it's good to push a little bit. It's important to not be complacent, because that's where we're at. That's what got us here where we're at now.
Right.
By the same token, do you think Huck Finn should be censored or banned?
Right.
In middle schools?
Yes.
That's a very common controversy all around. Yeah.
Tom Sawyer was an ass, but Huck Finn was not, and he used that word. So what do we do with that?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or Injun Joe.
I don't know your take on that, because you're a black man, you're an artist, so you probably feel similarly to Brian about words and poetry and all that.
I'm in a group called Black Art Space in Cincinnati, and we get the Black Lives Matter murals that's downtown. And words matter, right? From a cultural standpoint. Two bros in here, two of us bros size myself, unless some of y'all got some Negro in y'all somewhere down.
Somebody.
They might be creepy, y'all.
Somebody do.
That's my bad. right? Somebody got a mask, somebody got a wide nose, ladies and gentlemen. So I mean, I can tell you this, is that words matter, content matters, and being African American male, even though it is saturated in our culture, in our music, and like especially like hip hop and rap and everything else. And what my white Anglo-Saxon Protestant counterparts say to me, well, why is it okay?
What can I say?
Right, and it's like, well, because it's a cultural thing, and a lot of times it's context. It is how it's used, it is why it's used, and how it makes you feel. It is the purpose behind the word. I'm in this group at North Carolina University, and it's called Mourning, the Creation of Racial Academies. Right? And they have diligently sought out the verbiage behind the term white, the term black, when it was created for us, because there's no way I'm black. I mean, I'm dark skinned, but Jesus, what's black? Okay, so this stage is black, right? And there's no way this gentleman is white. So, but words matter. Words matter, right? So there was some things that happened years ago where they decided that we're going to designate these people as white, because here's a terminology that's associated with that: pureness, this and that, all those terms, and the counterpart that we're going to label these people black, and all the negative, vernacular that goes along with that, we're going to put that on them too. You can see that in Black Sheep, Black Ice. I have a far friend of mine. He does a whole thing that's called Black Box, and it talks about all the negativity associated with the word black and how that it comes on us, because it's very intentional. Yes. Right? Very intentional, and then even a word that people don't like to say that we say all the time. Especially when we play cards somewhere and you can't get all your books or whatever.
Well, even
But
even the black and white.
But I think being mindful and being cognizant of the fact that, man, I'm kind of past certain things because I'm an artist, and I'm like, man, I'm really big on, artists being able to express themselves. I do have a problem with hate. Yes. I have a serious problem with hate. But like when it comes to artistry, I don't see there is no bubble with me for art. I got one of my favorite artists, Carol Walker, does these huge cutouts of these depictions of what slavery was like, especially for African American girls. And I don't think people understand the gravity of when you're somebody's property. Do to you, and there is no laws that can ever protect you because you are property. And pedophilia didn't start recently. Rape didn't start recently. So so there is a weight, and those things get passed down from a psychological standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint. There's some things that happen. So it's very touchy, and I don't mind talking about it, but I'm just a country boy that cut inside the lines, you dig what I'm saying? But I'm an artist, and I feel like the conversation should be had, and I feel like we should be able to have it without you feeling like, oh my God, I don't want to offend you.
Yes.
You shouldn't have to walk on eggshells. You should be bold with your questions, because if you don't ask questions, you can't get no answers. Right. And people love being ignorant. So I feel like, content, and I feel like, purpose. People are when people are trying to hurt you with words, they can do so. As opposed to somebody saying something that's like, come on, man, now bro didn't mean it like that. Stop it. Right. Matter of fact, he got more music on his MP3 than you do. Come on, bro. You have to be mindful of intent and purpose behind something. But that being said, I know some cats, it's zero tolerance. It don't matter. I don't care how you say it. and every Cup fan book needed to be burned, and every Quentin Tarantino movie needed to be banned. Zero tolerance. So it's all about the person and their perspective, and being mindful of that arena and who you are and who you represent as an individual. Now I'm an artist, so I'm kind of like I don't fall under left or right. I'm like in the middle, and I believe that expression is what matters. But I also believe, but I don't do hate. I do art that will expose hate. I'm all about that. But I don't believe in intentionally trying to hurt somebody, especially with particular kinds of rhetoric or vernacular. That makes sense.
That's great, and I think actually it kind of ties into what I was thinking about too. For Stephen, so we were just talking about how black and white, right? Those extremes, the way that it actually doesn't describe anything, right? Because black and white, they're so extreme, it doesn't capture any of the nuance that actually occurs in the middle, which is where most of life takes place. So I'm thinking for you, you were talking about Odysseus and how it was much easier to go against a Cyclops, where he just knew that he had to take something, stuff it in the eye, and that was it, than it was to actually deal with something that was complex. And do you find that this is kind of what we're all struggling with when it comes to monsters?
Well, I think Odysseus represents pretty much, you could say, an everyman. And the one reason why we continue reading both the Iliad and the Odyssey is because it resonates. It's got a modern contemporary resonance to it. And that resonance is exactly what you're talking about. Back then, you have to think this is a poetic sensibility writing in the 8th century. And he already intuits that humankind is a very complex thing. And life is a complex thing. And the whole metaphor of the journey, it's filled with monsters, with obstacles. But in the end, he realizes is exactly this. Complexity doesn't make things easy. But it begins to define what we are. And then once you come to terms, let's say, with the complexity, I think you have a better understanding of who you are. It's really interesting the way the Odyssey ends. Odysseus goes back, and the very first thing he does, he's very suspicious of Penelope, and this is a mirror reflection of his own infidelity, his own problems with who he is. But then once he finds that she's been faithful, then he becomes this monster to the suitors. And we talk about forgiveness. What does he end up doing? It is the